Hey, Gerard, how are you today?
Good to see you, my friend. How's life?
Yeah, not as good. Well, look, we're privileged to have a great guest today. Leonhard Birnbaum is the new CEO of E.ON. And look, there's a lot to talk about when it concerns to E.ON and the German utility the past 10 years and where they're going forward. So he's been very transparent and he's really willing to answer all the questions we have for him. And I guess you have a lot of questions for him.
Oh, I can't wait to ask him lots of questions. Of course, he's been in the industry for 10 years now at this point in time as a former board member of RWE and obviously involved in energy and now E.ON. So it's great to have him.
Yeah, and bring a bit of clarity because they've been shuffling assets between RWE and E.ON. So it looks like E.ON is now, for me, a beautiful cash cow. Is just going to produce cash, dividend, the leverage, but what's the future? So that's what I'm curious about.
Well, it's great to have Leo on board. Leo, it's very nice to have you.
Yeah, good afternoon to both of you, Gerard, Laurent. Looking forward to the discussion as well.
Good.
I'm just not promising that I will answer every question, but we'll see.
Well, listen, can I kick off, right? You've been as a board member of the two biggest utilities in Germany for over a decade. And if I just put my former analyst hat on, I look at it as the lost decade. And the reason I say that is just, there's been a lot of shareholder value destruction. And I'm interested to see what you learned from this decade. What your takeaways?
Yeah, it's actually a fair question to start with. And there may be two underlying reasons. One is we were stuck in the fights of the past, right? I mean, if you look at the last decade, we had this eternal aftermath of the nuclear debates. And we just finished it now last week, actually, the final agreement with the state to settle all court procedures yet. So I think that's reason number one, obviously, like with the nuclear phase out, which we determined in 2001, the lifetime extension 2010, the Fukushima in 2011, all the court cases, and now 2021, we are basically back in 2001. So that's maybe one reason. We still had to settle all the past, and that is obviously something that is not allowing you to move forward. It's holding you backwards. But there's a learning, maybe you can't fight the zeitgeist. The zeitgeist in German nuclear was against German nuclear. So it was a lost battle from the beginning, but still it took us 10 years to even then, once we had conceded that it's over, it took 10 years to get it off the table. I think the second reason is the amount of change is unbelievable. And maybe that's the one thing that we actually have to challenge ourselves for. We did not believe such an amount of change being possible in 10 years. We didn't believe that the political will was so massive to drive a transition at the cost at which we actually drove it in Germany. And so again, but that's maybe again the point, if society really wants something and politics then translate it into actions, then it's going to happen, at least in a country like Germany. So that's maybe the second. I would say, however, even though in terms of shareholders, it was probably a lost decade, at the same time, we laid the foundations which we are now using to position ourselves in a new way. So we have done something right. We have probably done more wrong. But I guess now both RWE and E.ON are ready to really do their respective contribution going forward.
Well, maybe just leading on from that then, if you look going forward the next 10 years, for me, I think it's actually going to be the really exciting 10 years. Whatever about the last 10 years, if you think in terms of the energy transition, the Energiewende, I think it's going to be a tough 10 years, but a really interesting one. So how do you now, taking over E.ON as a CEO of E.ON, how do you sort of prepare for that?
Yeah, actually, I love what's ahead of us. We're going to see a fundamental redefinition of our industry. I mean, we have seen a redefinition to a certain extent already over the last decades by the introduction of renewables. But ahead of us now, I think it's going to be even more exciting, because it's not just the renewables production. It's the combination with heat. We need to green heat. It's the electrification of e-mobility. So we have complete sectors moving towards the energy industry. It's the full digitization of our industry, because we will not be able to steer, to run those assets, those systems without a full digitization, because complexity is going to go up so much. So I think actually we have seen a huge transformation, but I believe we're going to see even more exciting, even more transformation going forward. And actually, I'm not even sure I would limit it to a decade. It's probably going to be maybe 2 decades, because once we're done with all of that, hydrogen will kick in, and we need to then greenify the industry. So if we go for net zero, it's not going to be over in 2030, and we as utilities will be at the center of it all the way.
So I'm glad you talk about investment. So last year, your EBITDA was 6 billion. What's going to be your capex for the next 3 years, roughly?
We have in our midterm plan investments of 14 billion euros. So roughly per year, 4.7 billion a year. And that just tells you kind of like at the magnitude. And we actually see an increased investment need for the next 2 decades going forward. So easily, I think we have never seen in the last 3 decades growth as we're anticipating it for the next decades.
And so, okay, so for my simple head, it's like 5 billion a year. How will you split it between networks, retail, Germany, outside Germany, power, gas? How is it split? It's like even, or there are certain sector or certain country where you're going to push more?
Well, in our case, obviously, we will have an overproportional share of that in Germany, since it's just by far our largest market. We have announced it last week in our capital markets call. So we have roughly 75% in regulated infrastructure. Then the other 25% go to what we call customer solution business, which also includes, however, a partially asset-intensive business. For example, city quarter solutions, which are not in the regulated asset base, but have a long-term character themselves anyway. So we have, and then we have some minor investments in smaller businesses, including also the real commodity sales, sometimes a new IT system, etc. But the bulk, 75% regulated asset base, then a decent proportion, maybe 10%, 10-15% in infrastructure business, and then the rest all over. And I don't anticipate that this is going to change massively, because next to the regulated asset base, I think the trend for more investment in infrastructure, like investments on the customer side, is pretty robust.
And Leo, can I just sort of go back and just talk about what E.ON's done the last few years and ask you about it? Because I think for even people in the industry, it's hard to understand, right? The sort of the digital program that you've had, obviously, the ongoing sort of relationship with E.ON, Uniper, etc. Maybe just talk a little bit about that and what you see as the vision for the future of E.ON.
Yeah, we were as E.ON in 13, 14, we were fully integrated utility. We had basically all generation, trading, distribution, commodity, solutions business, etc. And then we figured out 2 things. Number one, it's very hard to combine those businesses, at least in some of the markets in which we're active, like Germany. You can't have a coal station on the one side, and fight, like for the best terms of a coal exit, and at the same time say, and I'm in the customer and the energy transition customer-centered network business. Yeah, so you're on one camp or another. Every time I went to Berlin, I ended up talking about coal or nuclear, no matter what. I could go for an innovation meeting and I ended up talking coal. Yeah. So we said, these businesses are just too different. We need to separate it. So what we did is we did an exit out of generation. So the generation and the trading business with it went into Uniper. And we said that is the wholesale market focused part. It's the customers, the wholesale market. They don't see end customers, and they have different investors. And we make it a standalone company. It was actually also in the end successful. And then we sold it first. We spun it off 53%, and then we sold it to Fortum. So we don't own anything on the generation and trading side anymore. What we kept is renewables, networks, and customer business. Then we actually looked at the whole business together with RWE, and we said, look, I mean, you can either be in the network side or in the renewables business, both massive investment needs. And then we actually we actually liked both businesses, but then we figured out we can do an asset swap with RWE. So we basically gave them the renewables, our renewables plus the renewables from energy, and they gave us their share in energy. So as a result, basically we have swapped the renewable position of us in energy versus the network position. So we became much, much bigger in networks. And so what are we doing today? Today we are networks and customer business. Customer business has really two elements: commodity sales plus solutions. And this is what we're doing, and we're not anymore into renewables, generation, or trading.
So as a trader, there's always a question that pops to mind. When we've seen the recent crisis in Texas, the one who went bust were the retailers.
Yeah.
And so how do you mitigate your risk, your exposure to wholesale prices?
Yeah.
Because, maybe it's going to be okay 360 days a year, but, you've got the tails, the fat tails, which are so expensive.
Yeah. Actually, the funny thing is, if you were a retailer in an area where the network went down, probably you were long and made loads of money.
Yeah, bizarrely. Yeah. All right.
Where the retailer in a region where the networks actually didn't go down, then probably you lost every profit that you could make for 10 years. Yeah?
Absolutely.
So I think Texas is a big mess, and I think the whole industry worldwide needs to look at it. So for what it really means for me is infrastructure needs to be extremely resilient also against extreme situations. Yeah, and Texas was not. Yeah, I mean, it's clear they were not resilient. Now, actually, we are looking at this extremely careful, and so we are putting much effort into hedging the right way and being very diligent about our exposure. And I think Texas just shows that this is the right thing. You can't just take any exposure without hedging it very carefully. And I'm actually thinking that lots of retailers are taking too much risk, and that has also materialized in Texas. So we are very diligent in not taking too much uncovered risk. And if I may say so, sometimes it costs you a little bit more to be long, but it probably pays off in the extremes. Being short is really what will kill you.
Absolutely. Gerard?
Leo, can we just talk about the UK business? Because you've been restructuring that business for the last few years, and we're seeing a huge amount of change in the whole retail area there, right? You've got new players like OVO and Octopus gaining significant amounts of market share. And obviously you also see a digitalization of that whole sector. And I personally think the whole decision by SSE to sort of sell its retail business was like a game changer for me. And I'd just love to hear, is it just me looking at it as a third party, or how do you look at it as a CEO, the changes going on in the UK, and what does it mean for your business?
Two comments. First, I think it just proves the point that I already made. If you can't digitize a business, probably you shouldn't stay in it. Yeah? That's true for networks and for customer solutions as well. And so the key point is we are very satisfied with the turnaround that we have managed to do by migrating npower on a new platform, which we call E.ON Next. And we are now this year going to migrate our E.ON customers, E.ON UK customers on the same platform to digitize it completely, because it just means, actually, it doesn't mean only better, higher efficiency, lower cost. It also means better service, better products, higher flexibility. So I think it's a question of survival. So first thing is, if you can't digitize, get out of it. Yeah. And the second one is, but if you can digitize, actually, I think then you can turn around businesses. And actually, we announced it again in our results, the Q1 presentation. We have turned around by more than 200 million the results in 1 year. So it just shows you, what the lever is if you can really get to a competitive platform. Now, to be very clear, the UK was a surprise for us, because when we bought Energy, we assumed that we would actually not buy anything in the UK, because Energy had announced that they would actually spin off their business into a joint venture together with SSE, which they would then float. And then all of a sudden, 1 year into the deal, we learned we're going to double our UK exposure. And that was a real surprise. But then again, we learned that a year into the deal, then if you think about it, we have now started the migration. We have started the migration last June. So we have migrated basically all of npower out of the home office onto a new platform. And it has perfectly worked. So in that sense, you see me very satisfied about the progress we've made, even though clearly the UK was no fun in the last years, especially not for npower.
So, Gerard, let me jump in, because, you talk about retail, so let's talk a bit about smart meters. First, how smart are they? That's number one. How many smart meters are there in your customer base right now?
Yeah. Now, actually, I would like to differentiate between markets. Smart meters drive me nuts. No? On the whole world, we are actually rolling out smart meters in a very efficient way via the regulated network business. Yeah. Now, there are two exceptions in the world, and we actually own both. And the one exception is the UK, which, for reasons which I never understood, decided that the smart meters should be rolled out by the sales part, which creates a complexity which is unimaginable. And then we have the Germans, which have an even more complex model, where the rollout is happening via the networks and via the non-competitive parts of the business. But then they made it so complex that we haven't even started really. Yeah. So Germany is like, I have the two worst exceptions when it comes to smart meters in the world, and I have them both massively in my portfolio. So I have several millions smart meters, but actually I'm wondering, why don't I have 10 million more, and why didn't I have them already 10 years ago and in a much easier way? And now to really kick me off in Germany, it's like we were 5 years late in rolling out the smart meters, and now it has been stopped by a court ruling, which basically decided 3 weeks ago or something like that, that the certification of the smart meters is not appropriate. So I think I have many smart meters, but smart meters are for me a proof point how we can screw it up big time when it comes to digitization in Europe and Germany more than anybody else. So, sorry, I'm really emotional about this.
No, Leo, that's great that you're emotional about it, because I'm sitting in Eastern Germany and I'm looking at this and I want to digitalize my house, and it's laughable really, the whole thing, because it's also a critical part of digitalization and, as you call it, sector coupling and optimization, right? So it's quite interesting what you said there, because I suppose my question to you really would be then, what do the politicians say when you react like you've just reacted to me, to them? What do they say?
Yeah, let me be very clear. Smart meters are actually an excellent idea, not because they allow us to actually send the bill kind of like automatically. Yeah. The smart meters are the torches which actually shed light into the darkness of the low voltage system. Yeah, exactly. They would be something to give us an instantaneous understanding of the situation in the grid at any point in time, anywhere. Yeah, And so actually, you could think about smart meters being the sensors which actually give us intelligence about our grid at any point in time. And if you have that intelligence, it changes everything, how you can operate the system, how you can maintain them, asset management, and so on. And also which products you can provide to your retail customers. Yeah. But so it really makes a difference whether you have smart meters or not. And therefore, it's such a catastrophe that we don't have them. Yeah. Now, if I tell that to politicians, they usually say, oh, yeah, but then, nothing changes. So I usually tell them the story, look, I have in Sweden 1 million smart meters. I have 1 million customers there. I have 1 million smart meters. Actually, right now, I'm rolling out the second generation of smart meters in Sweden, because the first generation of smart meters has run out of their technical lifetime. And whilst the first generation is out of technical lifetime, in Germany, I haven't even started with the first generation. So, and next one comes, and obviously in Sweden, we are rolling it out all on wireless, remote access. So because we have perfect coverage, even in the last village anywhere. Now, when it comes to broadband coverage in the last village of Eastern Germany, just forget about it. So in Germany, it's not only are we late, it's also much more complex. And we don't have the infrastructure. So I think the smart meters are just a proof point how Germany has completely failed on providing infrastructure, digitization, critical infrastructure. And now in Corona times, we are slowly waking up to the point that this might make a real difference. But the reaction I get is inconclusive. It doesn't really change something.
Yeah. No, I'm totally with you on that. And it's easy to get negative about it. So let's talk about the future, right? And positive. I mean, come on, you've just taken over this great utility. How do you see the next 10 years and what are your big priorities, may I say?
As I said it, we are in an industry which is looking at decades of growth. We are an industry which undoubtedly is kind of like the foundation of modern society. So it's like we are not a cigarette industry where you can discuss, does anybody need tobacco? No, nobody can discuss that you need power. So actually we're providing something society needs. We are actually providing this in an environment where our services, are facing a massive demand growth for the next years. Electrification is pushing complete sectors in our direction. So the future is bright. What else? Now I personally, I see three priorities. Leverage the growth. If such a growth is happening in your industry, you must benefit from it. If you don't grow with the market, then it just means you're not the best owner of your business. Somebody else should own you. So growth is priority number one. Sustainability, which is really driving this growth, is priority number two. And number three is digitization, because I said it already, if you can't digitize, shouldn't be in the business. I would also say if you're not sustainable, probably you will not be in the energy business for long. So those are the priorities: growth, sustainability, digitization.
If I can ask a question, because I'm really curious about it. It's this whole EV charging thing. First of all, you hear now automotive industry saying, oh, we're going to do our EV charging. You see utilities say we're going to do our EV charging. You see oil companies say we're going to do it. Pretty much plus you got startups. I'm very confused. First of all, is anyone making any money in EV charging? And if not, when do you see it a very profitable business, and under what form?
First, I have an e-car. That's clear. So I need to do that as a utility executive. Now, first, I would say for sure the infrastructure business is going to benefit from it, because it just means additional growth. And the more aggressively we move towards e-mobility, the better for the infrastructure providers, because then more infrastructure is needed in a shorter time period, which means additional opportunities. So second, now we have seen, for example, we have a large EV charging business also in Denmark, in the Copenhagen area, where we actually bought Better Place, long time ago already. And we see now a number of sites moving much faster than we anticipated into profitability. So yes, I believe actually, and then that the dynamics on EV will be probably faster than anticipated right now. And for me, that also implies probably we will have a faster move towards profitability, also for the non-infrastructure part of it. Yeah. Having said all of that, I believe that it depends very much on the business model which you have. You know, are you providing the infrastructure platform? Are you providing hardware? Are you providing the billing part, or are you providing products on it? Yeah, I can tell you with products, customer products like wall box, charging opportunities, smart meter, you can make money already today. With infrastructure, you can make money today. And with others, it depends how you have positioned yourself. So I wouldn't. So my short answer is, you can make money, probably rather sooner than later, but only if you have positioned yourself rightly so. And the number will never make money because they're either too late or have positioned themselves wrongly.
Excellent. Gerard, do you have other questions? Because I've got like 600 more. So.
Leo, just I'd love to sort of talk a little bit about the European perspective, right? Because I mean, what's clear for us is that what we need to do is electrify as much as we can of our energy system to decarbonize and do that as quickly as possible. But to do that, and to do that in the most economic way, it's really important to have close cooperation with your neighbors and also have learnings and stuff like that. And I'd love to see how you see that.
Yeah, I mean, I believe first the energy transition is a global phenomena, and it's certainly happening not on a German scale, or it's happening on a European scale. The German energy transition we could not have pulled off if not for our neighbors. You know, without our neighbors, it wouldn't have worked what we have done in Germany, shutting down the nukes, just adding renewables and so on. If we would have been an island like the UK, we would have run into trouble. So in that sense, I think it's really something that needs to be driven on a European level. And this is why I'm also so engaged in Eurelectric. We should certainly learn from our neighbors, but we should also kind of rely on our neighbors. We're just going to be more efficient if we do the energy transition on a European scale. And if you take, for example, offshore, it will be interesting to see whether we can manage offshore in the North Sea to become something which, you know, is not linked to one coast, but linked to a network that can go to different coasts. So really looking forward to that. Also, I think looking at Europe helps you to understand what you should be doing differently. For example, the Germans got out of their subsidy scheme in the old Renewable Feed-in Act only because of pressure from Europe. And we can be so happy that Europe pressured us to actually change our laws. That has saved German consumers billions and billions of euros. So having said so, we rely on Europe, because actually only on a European scale can we do what we're currently doing. We can actually benefit from learning from each other. So Europe is actually great. Actually, the markets are already European. I mean, let's talk about gas for a second. Yeah. Mm. I mean, it makes no sense to talk about national gas markets. We have European gas markets. Yeah. So in that sense, I think the energy market is one example where the EU has really, really made a positive difference.
And listen, as you spoke about gas there, I'd love to hear you've got a gas distribution grid and you've also got electricity distribution grid. I'd love to see how you see the future there, and especially thinking, I thought very interested is that National Grid recently decided that they've announced they're going to sell their gas grid, but then they decided they were going to buy a distribution grid as well, which I thought, wow, that's a very interesting move that they're making. So I'd love to hear anyway, if that has an impact on your thinking or what your view is.
Obviously, I'm observing also what dear competitors are doing with keen interest, but I would not comment on it. You should ask NG for that, right? National Grid for that. Now, I think gas, I mean, first I would say the future is really electric. And you know that Eurelectric believes that. And I think that electricity is the energy form which has the most growth potential in future. Having said that, if we want to go for carbon net zero, we struggle to do that 100% electricity based. Now, you've all seen that kind of like when it comes to cement, chemical industry, steel, metals, steel and metals, we struggle to do that without gas. So power to gas, hydrogen is now, kind of like the big boss in Europe. But I think what really has changed is the difference between 80% reduction and 100% reduction. It requires you to use gas carriers, so green gas carriers. So I think there is a future for gas as long as if we think about this. Now, in Germany and Eastern Europe, we have also one additional point, which is seen less in Southern Europe and in France. We are heating with gas, and we have massive infrastructure, built to provide that heat and that gas. Now, if we just replace that by electricity, it would mean massive reinvestment needs, which would probably, and we have done respective analysis, mean that we would get a high cost burden for our customers. And also, lots of our industrial customers actually receive their gas via the same grid that provides gas for heating purposes. So it's not straightforward in Germany to get out of gas. And as long as industry needs, such a carrier like gas, then even if it's hydrogen or green gas in the end, it means there is a place for gas to play, for an increasingly greenified gas to play also in the heating market. And so I think that's the debate, because obviously if you look at it with French eyes, where heating happens electrically, it's a completely different picture. Or in Southern Europe, where heating is just less relevant than in Germany. So I think that's a balance. I'm not exactly clear what the future will be and how it will really play out. But what we know is the future will be more electric. But personally, I believe that there is a role for gas to play, and what role exactly still needs to be figured out.
Yeah, it's kind of aligned with what we're thinking here. I mean, the more renewables you put in a system and the less value they have. The last 20% are hard. They look like really very, very tough to justify. Gerard, before we close it up, do you have any last question, probably?
I did actually, but it's just gone from my head. Sorry. I did have something to say, but it's gone from my head. It'll come back in a second. Sorry, you asked something else. We just cut that bit out. Ask something else there, Laurent. I did have one thing, but it was, man.
No, hydrogen.
I do know what it is. Sorry.
Okay, sorry, I don't have to rant around hydrogen.
No.
Gerard.
Leo, I just wanted to go back to E.ON and the growth possibilities going forward. Because if I look from the outside, I say, well, you're in a distribution grid business and you're also in a retail area. In the distribution grid, it's difficult to grow because there's a lot of money chasing assets, which you could say, you're not going to buy them at those prices. And the second thing is, you say in that whole retail area, oh man, is there really growth in that because of all these new players and margin pressure, whatever? How do you look at that? Do you see growth? Do you see you're going to have to go out there and make acquisitions? Or do you really see, hey, listen, there's going to be so much need for investment in my area that I'm just going to grow faster than the market?
Now, look, we have 4 to 5% RUP growth easily for as long as we can look forward. We have the Euroelectric study, which has pointed at the growth potential in distribution networks, which is massive. It's a 60-70% growth, above what we have seen in the past. So, no matter which number in the end is right, it just means organic growth options are already massive. And I can mirror that. These are just not theoretical predictions. Mm-hmm. If I look at just the requests for renewables connection that I get, the requests for customer connection, the requests for new data centers, I can easily see that growth for years to come. So if you take, like if you say, yes, it's hard to do M&A because indeed there's lots of money chasing everything that is up for sale, yeah, especially regulated business. In reality, if I can show for 10 years, 5% growth each year, hey, I have no problems. So in that sense, that's number one. That's the regulated part. On the unregulated part, the investment needs of developers, city quarter developers, and so on is also massive. So actually, yes, M&A might be needed, but I would argue probably more to build capabilities and get scarce resources than to actually buy business. And in that sense, I'm actually quite optimistic. As I said, it's a growing world. It's all moving our direction. So we're in pretty good shape.
So let's talk a bit about the future, because 12 years ago, the combined market cap of RWE and E.ON was above 100 billion, and now combined, you're less than 50.
Yeah.
So the question is, when do we see that 100 back?
I hope rather sooner than later, but I would not go for billion predictions. I say if we can show that we are not only a resilient, robust business, but also a business with a clear growth path, and I think we're going to see then we're actually going to see significant improvements again. But as I said, certainly the last decade, we started this interview with this notion, the last decade was a lost decade. I agree, yeah. But I would argue that probably the next decade will be our decade because we have a good perspective going forward. One that we really didn't have in the last 10 years, because in the last 10 years, it was all about consolidation and shrinking and, the battles of the past. But now we are moving forward. And in that sense, I'm optimistic for it. And when capital markets will show something that I've learned, you should ask the capital markets. But if we deliver consistently, they usually tend to reward it.
Good. Well, I think we passed our 30 minutes. So really, I thank you very much, Leo, for coming on this panel and be very, very open, very transparent. You've got a lot on your plate, but I'm sure you're the man who can deliver. So thank you very much.
Gerard, Laurent, thank you very much also from my side. And as you've seen, it's not so hard if you're an optimist. And some naive optimism, I think, is a prerequisite for a successful executive these days.
Yeah. And I thank you. It's good seeing you, man. I'm really glad, as just to follow on from Laurent, being so open with us and also being emotional, Leo. We need this. This is great. Thank you very much. And I wish you all the best with the new position. Thank you very much. And once Corona is over, maybe we even meet for a glass of wine. I hope so.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Take care.